Greetings, students. Today, I will be explaining to you chapter number 3 of your NCERT textbook, First Flight. The name of the chapter is Two Stories About Flying. There are two parts of this chapter, and I will be explaining to you part 1 in this video. The name of part 1 is His First Flight. It was written by Liam O. Flaherty. Before we begin, since the earliest times, humans have dreamt of conquering the skies. Here are two stories about flying. So, there are two stories about flying that are presented to us in this chapter, but we will be focusing on the part 1 today. This story, the part 1, is about a young seagull who is afraid to fly, who's scared of flying. How does he conquer his fear? But before we begin the story, we should know what a seagull is, right? A seagull is, as we can see through the name, it's a bird related to sea, a bird that is found near seas and oceans. It looks like the bird in this picture, and they are awesome divers, awesome floaters, and awesome swimmers. They can dive into the sea and catch their prey. They feed on sea life. Fishes like herrings, starfishes, and other things like crabs, these are their food. And now we will move on to the text of the chapter, and I will be explaining to you the chapter one paragraph at a time. The young seagull was alone on his ledge. His two brothers and his sister had already flown away the day before. He had been afraid to fly with them. Somehow, when he had taken a little run forward to the brink of the ledge and attempted to flap his wings, he became afraid. The great expanse of sea stretched down beneath, and it was such a long way down, miles down. He felt certain that his wings would never support him. So he bent his head and ran away back to the little hole under the ledge where he slept at night. Even when each of his brothers and his little sister, whose wings were far shorter than his own, ran to the brink, flapped their wings, and flew away. He failed to muster up courage to take that plunge, which appeared to him so desperate. His father and mother had come around calling to him shrilly, upbraiding him, threatening to let him starve on his ledge unless he flew away. But for the life of him, he could not move. So, this story is basically about a young seagull, as we have been already told, and this seagull is very much afraid, scared of flying. He was alone on his ledge. Meaning of ledge is a cliff that is found near the seas and oceans, where the waves go and collide, and he was alone on his cliff, on the cliff that the family lived on. His two brothers and his sister had already flown away. They had started flying a day before, but he was afraid even to fly with them. Somehow he did try to do it. He ran forward, he went to the brink, the edge of the cliff, and tried to flap his wing, move his wings up and down, but he got scared and he came back. The great expanse of sea stretched down beneath. Below the cliff was vast sea as far as the eye could see. And he was afraid of that because it was a long way down, miles down. It was a high cliff, and he was very sure that his wings will not support him, will not help him, and he will fall down and die. So he bent his head, he moved his head, and ran away back to the hole that he slept in, that he lived in. Even when his brothers and his little sister, whose wings were far shorter and who were even younger than him, had flew away, he could not muster up his courage to take that leap, and which was very desperate. He was very desperate to take that leap, that jump, that plunge, but he could not muster up his courage. He could not put together his courage to do that thing. His father and mother had been calling him shrilly, loudly. They have been shouting loudly to call him, but he could not do that. They upbraided him. The meaning of upbraiding is to scold. They scolded him. They threatened him that they will not give him food and he will die starving on his cliff if he did not fly. But for his own life's sake, for the sake of his own life, he could not move, because he thought he will live on if he stayed there on that cliff, and if he flew away, he will fall down and die. That was 24 hours ago. Since then, nobody had come near him. The day before, all day long, he had watched his parents flying about with his brothers and sisters, perfecting them in the art of flight, teaching them how to skim the waves and how to dive for fish. He had, in fact, seen his older brother catch his first herring and devour it, standing on a rock while his parents circled around, raising a proud cackle. And all the morning, the whole family had walked about on the big plateau midway down the opposite cliff, taunting him with his cowardice. The sun was now ascending the sky, blazing on his ledge that faced the south. He felt the heat because he had not eaten since the previous nightfall. So that scene when he was scared and his parents were shouting on him happened a day before, 24 hours ago. And since then, from that time, no one had come even to talk to him or look at him. The day before, the previous day, all day long, he watched his parents flying with his brothers and sister, following his brothers and sisters, teaching them the art of flying, teaching them how to skim the waves, how to drive through the waves, how to float in the waves, and how to dive in for fish, how to catch the fish while you are flying. He also saw his brother catch his first herring. Herring is a sea fish which is soft and soft finned. There is a picture of it I have attached so that you can better understand what a herring is, and devour it, enjoy its taste. Standing on a rock, while he was standing on a rock, he was eating that herring, that young seagull's elder brother, and his parents were circling around him and raising a proud noise, shrieking proudly. And all the morning, the whole family had walked about on the big plateau midway down the opposite cliff, taunting him with his cowardice. And all morning, previous day, this happened, and the morning of the day that is currently in the scene, the setting, what happened? The whole family was standing on a big plateau. What is a plateau? Which was opposite to the cliff, and they were taunting him for his own cowardice. Cowardice means काहिलपना, उसका खुद का काहिलपना. The sun was now ascending the sky. The sun was going on in the sky. The sunshine was going high, and it was about to. The noon was about to come, and blazing and shining very brightly on the cliff. He felt the heat of the sun because of hunger. Because what happens when you are hungry, you become more irritable, everything starts feeling more and more, you feel more pain and you feel more exhausted and everything. So that was what was happening with him. Cackle is a good laugh. I forgot to tell you the meaning of cackle in between. So they were raising crowd shrieks of laugh with his young elder brother when he caught his first herring. He stepped slowly out to the brink of the ledge, and standing on one leg with the other leg hidden under his wing, he closed one eye, then the other, and pretended to be falling asleep. Still, they took no notice of him. He saw his two brothers and his sister lying on the plateau, dozing with their heads sunk into their necks. His father was preening the feathers on his white back, only his mother was looking at him. She was standing on a little high hump on the plateau, her white breast thrust forward. Now and then she tore at a piece of fish that lay at her feet and then scraped each side of her beak on the rock. The sight of the food maddened him. How he loved to tear food that way, scraping his beak now and again to wet it. He stepped out to the edge of the cliff he was standing upon, and he was standing on one leg and hid the other leg under his wing. He closed one eye and then the other, and he pretended to be falling asleep and falling down so that his parents or brothers or any his sister would notice and come to give him food or save him or do anything. But no one took a single notice, no one paid attention. He saw that his brothers and sisters were lying on the plateau and were sleeping with their hunks into heads sunk into their necks. That is how these birds sleep. They hide their heads into their necks, fold their heads into the necks, and sleep away. So they were sleeping. His brothers and sister were sleeping. His father was preening. Preening means cleaning the feathers with beak. So his father was cleaning his feathers with the help of his beak, the white back. Only his mother was looking at him. Mother, who always cares about us, was looking at him. She was standing on a little high hump on the plateau. There was a hump on the plateau, little higher part on the plateau, hump like the camel has it on its back. There was that hump on the plateau too, shaped like that. And her white chest was thrust forward. It was facing forward in the front direction towards the young seagull. Now and again, she was tearing a piece of fish that she had, gotten from the sea, and then scraped each side of her beak on the rock. She scraped means to rub, and then she rubbed her sides of the beak on the rock to wet it. Meaning of wet is to sharpen. So she scraped her beak on the rock to sharpen it, and the sight of food maddened him. The food maddened him. He was very hungry and he was starving. So the food was, very much tempting for him. He needed it for survival. How he loved, he remembers how he loved to tear the food that way with his beak and then scraping his beak now and again to sharpen it so that the meat, the flesh could be cut down easily into pieces and eaten. Ga ga ga, he cried, begging her to bring him some food. Gakola, she screamed back derisively. But he kept calling plaintively, and after a minute or so he uttered a joyful scream. His mother had picked up a piece of the fish and was flying across to him with it. So there was this language that these birds talked him. It's hard for us to comprehend. So the writer has written it in this the way we hear the birds chirping, ga ga ga. He cried, and he was begging her to bring him some food. He was begging for food because he was too much hungry. Kakola, she screamed back derisively. What is the meaning of derisively? In a manner to express anger or contempt. She was very angry, right? So she screamed back angrily that you should fly down and find some of your own. But he kept calling plaintively. In pain, he kept calling, and after a minute or so, he uttered a joyful scream because her mother had picked up a piece of fish and flew to him. And she flew towards him. He leaned out eagerly, tapping the rock with his feet, trying to get nearer to her as she flew across. But when she was just opposite to him, she halted, her wings motionless, the piece of fish in her beak almost within the reach of his beak. He waited a moment in surprise, wondering why she did not come nearer, and then, maddened by hunger, he dived at the fish. With a loud scream, he fell outwards and downwards into space. He leaned out eagerly. He moved forward and leaned out, tapping the rock with his feet. As he was moving, he was tapping the rocks. His movement was like he was tapping the rocks, like one of Mickey Mouse, trying to get nearer to her. He was trying to get nearer to the mother as she was coming to him. So he got to the edge of the cliff, as you can see in the picture on the side. But when she came opposite to him, when she came nearer to him, she stopped. To halt, halted means to stop. And her wings went motionless. She stopped flapping her wings. The piece of fish, the flesh was still in her beak, almost in the reach of his beak, but he could not reach it. It was almost in the reach, but he would have to dive to reach it. He waited a moment in surprise. He waited for a moment to think why she was not coming near to him, and then his anger drove him and he dived at the fish. He jumped at the fish. And with a loud scream, he screamed loudly and he fell outwards and downwards into space. And he fell as he dived for that piece of flesh. He fell downwards into the empty space between the cliff and the sea. Then a monstrous terror seized him and his heart stood still. He could hear nothing. But it only lasted a minute. The next moment, he felt his wings spread outwards. The wind rushed against his breast feathers and then under his stomach and against his wings. He could feel the tips of his wings cutting through the air. He was not falling headlong now. He was soaring gradually downwards and outwards. He was no longer afraid. He just felt a bit dizzy. Then he flapped his wings once and he soared upwards. Ga 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 ga. Ga kola. His mother swooped past him, her wings making a loud noise. He answered her with another scream. Then his father flew over him screaming. He saw his two brothers and his sister flying around him, curveting and banking and soaring and diving. So, after he fell into the air, there was a monstrous terror. A terror that looks like a monster. There is a visual sensory detail that has been put into it. See the metaphor, monstrous terror. The terror that looks like a monster seized him. He was captivated by that terror, and his heart stopped beating for a while. This is an organic sense. He could hear nothing. But it only lasted a minute. But all of this fear lasted only for a minute, because the next moment he felt his wings spread outwards. His wings spread outwards, and the wind rushed against his breast feathers, his front feathers. The wind was rushing against it, and then under his stomach, and then against his wings. And he was floating in the sky. He was actually swimming, diving, or flying in the sky, in the space between the cliff and the sea. Not the space, I'm sorry. He could feel the tips of his wings cutting through the air. He could feel the tips was cutting amid the air, through the cutting the air apart. He was not falling headlong now, and he was not falling down now with his head in front. So, this was kinesthetic sense. The next moment, he felt his wings spread outwards, the wind rushed against his breast feathers, then under his stomach and against his wings. He could feel the tips of his wings cutting through the air. This is kinesthetic sense. He was no longer afraid. He was not afraid now. He just felt a bit dizzy, like the world was spinning. That feeling that you have, that everything is spinning round and round, and you are about to fall unconscious. Then he flapped his wings once and he soared upwards. And now he was able to flap his wings and he soared upwards because he knew that he was not falling down and he knew that he was flying now. His mother swooped past him, dived rapidly, flew in a speed past him to come across him, to come in parallel to him, her wings making a loud noise. And as she flapped her wings faster, they made a noise as they were also cutting through the air. Then his father flew over him screaming, and then his father screamed and started to fly over to catch him. He saw his two brothers and sisters also flying around him, curveting. The meaning of curveting is to leap like a horse, to jump like a horse. Curveting, jumping like a horse into the sky, into the space, into the air, and banking and soaring and diving. Meaning of banking is to fly tilted. When the birds have to take a turn, they tilt. One wing goes in upper direction and then the other one comes in the other direction. As when you turn a bike, it tilts a little. So that is what happened. They were banking and soaring and diving around him. Then he completely forgot that he had not always been able to fly, and he commended himself to dive and soar and curve, shrieking shrilly. And then he forgot that there was a time when he was also not able to fly. He was afraid of it. And he commended himself to dive. And then he started to dive more and soar more and curve more and shout loudly. He was near the sea now, flying straight over it, facing straight out over the ocean. He saw a vast green sea beneath him with little ridges moving over it, and he turned his beak sideways and cawed amusedly. His parents and his brothers and sister had landed on this green flooring ahead of him. They were beckoning to him, calling shrilly. He dropped his legs to stand on the green sea. His legs sank into it. He screamed with fright and attempted to rise again, flapping his wings. But he was tired and weak with hunger, and he could not rise, exhausted by strange exercise. His feet sank into the green sea, and then his belly touched it. He sank no farther. He was floating on it, and around him his family was screaming, praising him, and their beaks were offering him scraps of dogfish. He had made his first flight. So he came near to the sea and started flying over it. He was facing towards the ocean, and he saw green sea, vast, big green sea below him, with little ridges moving over it, with little stones coming out of it, little floras coming out of it. And he turned his beak sideways and cawed amusedly. And then he moved his beak here and there and made out the noises, cawed amusedly in happily way. Amusedly in an interesting way. We found out the meaning of this word in the last chapter 2, which was a question of trust from NCERT, Footprints Without Feet. His parents and brothers and sister had landed on this green flooring ahead of him on the green sea. They were floating in the green sea. Green flooring. See, there is a metaphor. The sea, because it was green colored, has been compared to flooring. They were beckoning to him, they were calling him loudly, calling shrilly, loudly. He dropped his leg to stand on the green sea. Now he had never been down the cliff, so that sea felt like land to him, and he tried to land on it, to stand on it. But what happened? His legs went into it, sank into it, and he screamed with fright. He was terrorized again, he was afraid again, and he screamed and attempted and tried to get up. He tried to flap his wings and go into the air again, but he was very much tired and weak with hunger, so he could not do that. He was not able to rise, and he was very much exhausted and tired by this strange exercise of flying and everything. So his feet sank into the green sea, and then his belly touched the surface of the sea, and then he stopped sinking, and then he was floating on the sea, on the surface, on the seabed. And around him, his family was screaming and praising him, and their beaks were offering him food, scraps of dogfish. He had made his first flight. So, this was the first flight of a seagull. There must be something that you were afraid of doing, and your parents and your family would have forced you to do it or tricked you into doing it. It must have been a great experience, like it was of this young seagull. That was about the story, that was the explanation of the story. We will wind it up now, call it a day. Thank you for listening to me, for watching this video. Have a great day. Happy learning.